There is something happening in your mind right now that you have never been taught to take seriously. Not a metaphor, not a motivational reframe. Something structural, something that sits at the foundation of what physics has spent the last century trying to explain and still cannot fully account for. Something the ancient traditions encoded into their most protected teachings, the ones they did not write down, the ones passed mouth to ear, in rooms that were never open to everyone. Your thoughts are not passengers in reality. They are not commentary on a world that exists independently of them. The layer beneath that assumption, the layer most people never reach because the surface explanation feels so solid, so obvious, so confirmed by every ordinary moment of every ordinary day, that layer reveals something that should change the way you understand every thought you are having right now. Most people believe thought is private, interior, sealed behind the skull, affecting nothing outside the body unless it becomes speech or action. This is the surface understanding. It is the layer you were handed before you were old enough to question it. And it feels true because the world around you appears to be doing what it does, regardless of what you think about it. The chair does not move because you think about it moving. The weather does not shift because you want it to. The surface version of reality seems to confirm, constantly and without exception, that your inner world and the outer world are separate systems with a wall between them. But here is what that surface version never shows you. The chair, the weather, the outer world you are observing, none of it is what it appears to be at the level where thought actually operates. Not philosophically, physically, the quantum level of matter, the level that particle physics has been mapping since the early 20th century, does not behave like a chair. It does not behave like weather. It behaves like something that has not yet decided what it is until something measures it, until something observes it. And the question that quantum mechanics has never fully answered, the question that sits at the center of its most contested and most carefully avoided interpretations, is this: what counts as an observation? That question is the veil, and on the other side of it is everything. Let's start with what you actually know about quantum mechanics. Not the pop science shorthand, but the real mechanics of what was found. Because the surface version of quantum physics, the one that gets summarized in 2 sentences and then used as a metaphor, is itself a layer that needs to be peeled back. The real findings are stranger than the summary, and the strangeness is exactly where the hidden layer lives. In 1927, a physicist named Werner Heisenberg published what became known as the uncertainty principle. The surface version you may have heard is that you cannot know both the position and the momentum of a particle at the same time. That sounds like a limitation of measurement, like the instruments are too clumsy. Like if we built better tools, we could eventually pin down both values simultaneously. That is not what Heisenberg found. What he found, and what the mathematics behind it make unavoidable, is that the uncertainty is not in the measurement. It is in the particle. A particle does not have a precise position and a precise momentum simultaneously. Both values do not exist at the same time. It is not that we cannot know them. It is that they are not both there to be known. The act of pinning down one value causes the other to become genuinely, physically indeterminate. Not hidden, not merely unknown. Indeterminate, unresolved. Not yet real in the sense that we use the word real. Peel that back a layer further. If a particle's properties are not fixed until they are measured, what is the particle between measurements? This is not a philosophical question. This is what the mathematics of quantum mechanics describes with extraordinary precision. Between observations, a particle exists as what physicists call a wave function, a probability distribution, a spread of possible states, each with a certain likelihood, none of them actual yet. The particle is not in one place waiting to be found. It is in a superposition of all its possible positions simultaneously, each one real in the sense of contributing to the probability field, none of them real in the sense of being the definite location. And then something observes it. The wave function collapses. The superposition resolves. One possibility becomes actual. The particle is now somewhere, has a definite property, is measurable and locatable in the ordinary sense. The surface explanation of this, the one that gets taught in introductory courses and repeated in popular articles, is that the measurement disturbs the system. The photon you fire at the electron to see where it is knocks the electron into a definite state. The instrument causes the collapse. This is the Copenhagen interpretation in its most digestible form, and it is the version most physicists use in practice, because it lets you do the calculations without having to answer the deeper question. But here is the layer beneath that explanation. The Copenhagen interpretation does not actually say, the instrument causes the collapse. It says, the collapse happens at the point of measurement, and then it carefully, deliberately refuses to say what a measurement is. Niels Bohr, who was the primary architect of the Copenhagen interpretation, was explicit about this. He drew a line between the quantum system and the classical observer, and he said the mathematics works on the quantum side of that line, and we do not ask questions about what is on the classical side. He called asking those questions meaningless, not unanswerable. Meaningless. That refusal is where the veil is thickest. And it is worth pausing here to understand what that refusal actually cost physics. Because Bohr's decision to declare the question meaningless was not a scientific conclusion. It was a methodological choice. A choice to preserve the calculability of the framework at the expense of the completeness of the explanation. The equations work perfectly without answering the question of what an observation is. You can predict experimental outcomes with extraordinary precision using the Copenhagen interpretation, and never once asking what happens to the wave function before the measurement, who or what counts as a measurer, or why the act of measurement singles out one possibility from the superposition and makes it real. The question was not answered. It was quarantined. And the quarantine held for decades because the equations were so useful that most physicists had no practical incentive to break it open, but some did. And what they found on the other side of the quarantine is the layer this transmission is built on. If this is landing for you at a level beneath the surface, there is something more I want to offer you here. Have you spent years trying every surface fix? Therapy, mindset work, manifestation, habit redesign, and the same patterns keep coming back in different clothes. Every one of those tools is working on belief and behavior. The actual pattern was installed deeper than any of them can reach. Beneath the veil, a quantum map of reality's hidden layers walks through the full 5-layer descent. The surface reality you were handed, the layer where the pattern was actually installed, the physics underneath that, the ancient traditions that mapped the same thing thousands of years ago, and what you actually are at the bottom of all of it. This is the layer that therapy, mindset work, and manifestation could never reach. The longer you keep working the surface, the longer that deeper layer keeps generating the same life. So do this one tonight. It's waiting in the pinned comment below. Now let's return to the layer we were descending into together. Because the question of what constitutes an observation, what causes a wave function to collapse from a spread of possibilities into a single actuality, is not answered by the mathematics. The mathematics describes what happens, it does not say why, and every interpretation of quantum mechanics that has been proposed since Bohr is essentially a different attempt to answer the question he refused to ask. The many worlds interpretation says the wave function never collapses. Every possible outcome occurs in a branching universe. The pilot wave theory says there is a hidden variable, a real particle guided by a real wave, and the apparent randomness is just our ignorance of the deeper deterministic layer. Relational quantum mechanics says the wave function is not a property of the particle at all, but a description of the relationship between the particle and a specific observer. And then there is the interpretation that physicists most often refuse to take seriously in professional settings, not because it has been disproven, but because it is uncomfortable. The von Neumann-Wigner interpretation. John von Neumann was one of the most rigorous mathematical minds of the 20th century. He formalized quantum mechanics into its most precise mathematical framework. And when he followed that framework to its logical conclusion, he found something that the physics community has spent decades trying to route around. He found that if you trace the chain of physical causation, the particle interacts with the measuring device interacts with the environment interacts with the detector interacts with the experimenter's sensory apparatus, and at every link in that chain, you still have a quantum system that has not yet collapsed. The superposition propagates. The indeterminacy passes from the particle to the instrument to the environment to the experimenter's neurons. The only place the chain stops, the only place von Neumann found that the mathematics required the collapse to terminate, was at the level of conscious experience. Not the brain, not the nervous system, the experience. Eugene Wigner, who was von Neumann's colleague and himself a Nobel laureate in physics, took this further. He proposed a thought experiment now known as Wigner's friend. Imagine a physicist inside a sealed laboratory who performs a quantum measurement. From inside the lab, the wave function collapses. A definite result is observed. But from outside the lab, before anyone opens the door, the entire system, the particle, the instrument, the physicist, is still a quantum superposition. The physicist is in a superposition of having observed result A and having observed result B. The collapse only propagates to the outside observer when the outside observer makes their own observation. Wigner concluded from this that consciousness is not just an observer of physical reality. Consciousness is what transforms quantum possibility into physical actuality. Let that land. Not as metaphor, as the logical consequence of the most precise mathematical framework in the history of physics, followed by two of its most rigorous practitioners to its unavoidable conclusion. Your awareness is not watching a reality that exists independently of it. Your awareness is participating in the resolution of what that reality actually is. And this is not a small claim. This is not a poetic extension of a scientific finding into spiritual territory. This is the direction the mathematics points when you refuse to stop asking the question that Bohr declared meaningless, when you follow the chain of causation without flinching, when you do not quarantine the uncomfortable conclusion because it disrupts the tidy separation between the physicist and the experiment. Von Neumann followed the chain, Wigner followed it further, and where it led was not mysticism. It was a precise, mathematically grounded statement about the relationship between consciousness and the physical resolution of reality. The veil between you and this conclusion is not a veil of ignorance. It is a veil of assumption. The assumption that the observer must be separate from the observed for science to work. The assumption that consciousness must be a product of matter rather than a precondition of it. Those assumptions are not conclusions the mathematics arrived at. They are premises the mathematics was handed before it began. And when you remove them and let the equations speak without those premises in place, the equations say something different. They say what von Neumann and Wigner heard them say, that the collapse terminates in experience, that consciousness is not inside the physical chain, it is where the physical chain ends. Now, let's go to the layer beneath even that. Because quantum mechanics, extraordinary as it is not the oldest map of this territory. The discovery that observation participates in creating the observed was not made in a 20th century laboratory. It was encoded in different language, in traditions that predate the scientific method by thousands of years. And the convergence between what they described and what the equations now confirm is not a coincidence that can be dismissed. It is the same hidden layer, found twice from opposite directions. The Upanishads, composed in Sanskrit somewhere between 800 and 200 BCE, contain a concept that the Western philosophical tradition has never fully absorbed. The concept is called Maya. The surface translation, the one that gets repeated in introductory comparisons between Hinduism and physics, is that Maya means illusion, that the world is an illusion. This is the surface version, and it misses the layer beneath it. Maya does not mean the world is not real. It means the world as it appears to the unexamined mind is a superimposition, a projected interpretation. The Sanskrit root of Maya relates to measurement and construction, to the act of making a form. What the Upanishads are pointing to is not that the chair is an illusion, but that the chair as a fixed, independent, self-existing object is a construction of the perceiving mind. The perceiving mind is not discovering a pre-existing reality. It is participating in the crystallization of one. The Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, one of the oldest, contains a dialogue in which the sage Yajnavalkya is asked, "What is the self?" And his answer, stripped of its layers of commentary, is this: the self is the one that sees, not what is seen, the seer. And the world that appears to the seer is not separate from the seer. The relationship between awareness and appearance is not the relationship between a camera and a landscape. It is the relationship between a dreamer and a dream, where the dreamer and the dream are made of the same substance. This is not a metaphor for the Upanishadic tradition. It is a description of the fundamental structure of reality, and the word they used for that substance, the substance that both the seer and the seen are made of, was Brahman, the ground of being, the undifferentiated field from which all appearances arise. Now hold that next to what quantum field theory describes. Quantum field theory, which is the more complete successor to basic quantum mechanics, does not describe reality as made of particles. It describes reality as made of fields, quantum fields that permeate all of space, that are present everywhere simultaneously, that exist in a ground state of minimum energy, called the vacuum state, and from which particles emerge as excitations, as localized vibrations in the field. A particle is not a thing. It is an event in a field, a temporary crystallization of something that is otherwise spread everywhere. The quantum vacuum is not empty. It is the ground state of every quantum field that exists. It seethes with what physicists call zero-point energy, a baseline of activity that cannot be removed even at absolute zero temperature. The vacuum is not the absence of reality. It is reality in its unmanifest state, its state of pure potential before any particular form has been selected. The Upanishadic sages called it Brahman. The quantum field theorists call it the vacuum. The language is different. The hidden layer is the same. And there is a further precision worth adding here, because the convergence goes deeper than the vocabulary. The Upanishads do not describe Brahman as a passive background, a featureless expanse that simply sits beneath appearances. They describe it as Chit, which means consciousness or knowing. Brahman is not just the ground of being, it is the ground of knowing. The undifferentiated field is not an unconscious substrate. It is awareness in its unmanifest state, prior to the division into seer and seen, prior to the crystallization of any particular form. The full Sanskrit formulation is Sat Chitananda, being, consciousness, bliss. The ground of reality is not described as matter that happens to produce consciousness in sufficiently complex arrangements. It is described as consciousness that happens to appear as matter in sufficiently crystallized configurations. Now hold that next to the quantum vacuum. The quantum vacuum is not described by physicists as conscious. but it is described as the ground from which all physical forms emerge. And the question of whether that ground has any relationship to awareness, any intrinsic knowing quality, any property that connects it to the experience of observation, is precisely the question that the Copenhagen interpretation declared meaningless. The question Bohr quarantined. The question that the Upanishadic tradition answered in the opposite direction, not by quarantining it, but by making it the foundation of the entire inquiry. Two traditions, separated by millennia and by every conceivable difference in method and language and cultural context, arrived at the same hidden layer from opposite directions. The quantum field theorists arrived at an unmanifest ground of pure potential that gives rise to all physical forms. The Upanishadic sages arrived at an unmanifest ground of pure awareness that gives rise to all appearances. The convergence is not between the words, it is between the layers they are pointing at. If this transmission is reaching a layer in you that you have been looking for, consider liking this video and subscribing, so these deeper explorations continue to find you. But there is a tradition that went further than the Upanishads in mapping the relationship between consciousness and the crystallization of reality from that field. And it is a tradition that most people in the Western world have encountered only in its most surface form. The Dzogchen teachings of Tibetan Buddhism. Dzogchen, which translates roughly as the Great Perfection or the Great Completeness, is considered within the Tibetan tradition to be the most direct and most complete teaching available. It is not a practice in the ordinary sense of something you do to achieve a result. It is a pointing out instruction, a direct indication of what is already the case, beneath the layer of what you think is the case. The central claim of Dzogchen, stated as directly as it can be stated in translation, is this: the nature of mind is the nature of reality, not similar to, not a reflection of, the same as. The awareness that you are looking out from right now, the bare fact of knowing, the capacity for experience itself, is not a product of the brain processing information about an independent world. It is the ground from which both the brain and the world arise as appearances. The Tibetan term for this ground is Rigpa. It is often translated as pure awareness or naked awareness. And what the Dzogchen masters consistently point to when they indicate Rigpa is not a state you achieve through meditation. It is what is already here, beneath the layer of conceptual overlay. It is what remains when you stop adding interpretation to experience. Not a blank emptiness, but a luminous knowing that is the basis of every experience you have ever had. What the Dzogchen tradition describes is a layer of reality beneath the layer where thoughts and perceptions seem to be happening. And from that layer, thoughts and perceptions are not things that happen to awareness. They are things that arise within awareness, as awareness from awareness, the way a wave arises from the ocean without ever becoming something other than ocean. The Tibetan text called the Kunjed Gyalpo, which is one of the root texts of the Dzogchen tradition, contains a passage that has been translated in various ways, but whose meaning is consistent across translations. It says, roughly, that all phenomena of existence are the display of the nature of mind, not caused by the nature of mind. not reflected in the nature of mind, the display of it. The way light is not caused by the sun and then reflected in the sun. Light is the sun's display. The sun and its light are not two different things in a causal relationship. They are one event, one nature, expressing itself as both source and expression simultaneously. This is what the Dzogchen tradition means when it says the nature of mind is the nature of reality. Not that the mind causes reality, not that the mind reflects reality. That mind and reality are the same nature, expressing itself as both the knowing and the known. And here is where the hidden layer connects back to the quantum. If awareness is not a product of the physical world, but the ground from which the physical world arises as appearance, then the question of whether consciousness causes wave function collapse is not a strange mystical intrusion into physics. It is physics catching up to what the deepest contemplative traditions have been pointing to for millennia. The observer is not separate from the observed. The measurement is not separate from the measured. The crystallization of possibility into actuality is not something that happens to consciousness. It is something that happens through consciousness, as consciousness, because consciousness is what the field of possibility actually is when it knows itself. That is the layer beneath the quantum layer. But we are not done descending, because there is a question that most people who encounter this material never ask. And it is the question that reveals the layer beneath the layer beneath the layer. If your thoughts participate in the crystallization of reality from quantum possibility, if awareness is not a passenger in a pre-existing world, but a participant in the ongoing resolution of what that world is, then what determines which possibilities get crystallized? What determines which wave functions collapse in which direction? What determines what your awareness brings into actuality? The surface answer, the one that gets given in most popular treatments of this material, is your thoughts. Think positive thoughts and positive realities crystallize. Focus on what you want and the field responds. This is the surface version. It is not wrong exactly, but it stops at a layer that conceals something more important beneath it. Because thoughts are not the deepest layer of your participation in reality. Thoughts are near the surface. Thoughts are what you can observe, what you can deliberately direct, what you can write down and examine. But beneath thoughts there is something that thoughts arise from, and that something is what actually shapes the field. The layer beneath thought is belief. Not belief in the sense of religious conviction, belief in the sense of what you are not questioning. The assumptions so deep they do not feel like assumptions, they feel like facts, they feel like the furniture of reality itself, so basic and so obvious that the idea of examining them never arises. These are not the thoughts you think. These are the thoughts that think you. And here is what makes this the critical layer. Your deliberate conscious thoughts are like ripples on the surface of water. They move. They create patterns. They interact with other ripples. but the depth of the water, the temperature, the pressure, the current that moves beneath the surface, that is the belief layer. And a ripple on the surface does not change the depth. A positive affirmation does not reach the belief layer. A visualization does not reach the belief layer. A moment of inspiration does not reach the belief layer. What reaches the belief layer is what you will discover in a moment. I want to pause here and ask you something directly. Has there been a moment in your own life when a layer suddenly became visible that you had been living inside without knowing it? A belief you had been breathing like air, a pattern that dissolved the instant you looked at it directly, a truth that was hiding in plain sight until something in you was finally ready to see it. Drop that moment in the comments. What was the hidden layer, and what finally made it visible to you? But first, let me show you something. Let me tell you about a man named Elias. Elias grew up in a city built on a hill, a city so old that its streets had been laid over older streets, and those streets over older ones still, so that if you dug in the right places, you would find layers of cobblestone going down and down, each layer a different city that had stood in the same place, each city thinking it was the only one, each city unaware of what lay beneath its foundations. Elias was a cartographer. His work was to make maps, and he was very good at it. He mapped the streets and the buildings and the heights and the distances with precision. His maps were accurate. People used them to navigate. They trusted them. But one day, Elias was hired to map a building that was being renovated, an old building in the oldest part of the city, and the renovation required him to go into the basement. And in the basement he found a door, and behind the door he found a staircase going down, and at the bottom of the staircase he found another street. Not a ruin, a street, intact. Cobblestone still fitted together, walls still standing, doorways still arched. A city beneath the city, preserved in the dark. Elias spent 3 days down there. He mapped everything. And when he came back up, he looked at his surface maps differently. He understood for the first time that every street he had ever mapped was the ceiling of something else. Every foundation he had measured was someone else's roof. The city he thought he knew was the thinnest layer of a much deeper city. And his maps, accurate as they were, had never shown any of it. He did not stop making surface maps. People still needed them. But he added something to every map he made after that. A small notation in the corner. Deeper layers exist beneath this surface. Explore accordingly. You have been given maps of reality. They are accurate as far as they go. The surface layer is real. The chair is there. The weather is there. The world you navigate every day is there. But your maps have been missing that notation. Deeper layers exist. And the deepest layer, the one beneath the quantum layer, beneath the belief layer, beneath even the layer of what you think you want, that layer is where your thoughts are actually doing their work. Let's name that layer precisely. The deepest layer of your participation in reality is not your thoughts. It is not your beliefs. It is your fundamental sense of what you are. Not who you are in the biographical sense, your name, your history, your relationships, your achievements. What you are. the nature of the thing that is having this experience. The answer, usually unexamined, to the question, what kind of thing is doing the experiencing? And the answer most people are operating from, the answer so deep it has never been questioned, is this: I am a small, separate, bounded thing, enclosed in a body, looking out at a world that is not me, trying to affect that world from the outside, subject to its forces, hoping to get what I want from it before I disappear. That is the deepest belief, not a thought, not an opinion, a structural assumption about the nature of the experiencer. And it is that assumption, more than any thought you have ever deliberately thought, that shapes which possibilities crystallize from the quantum field. Because if you are a small separate thing, then your relationship to the field is the relationship of a thing to something outside it. And a thing outside the field cannot participate in the field. It can only react to what the field produces. The assumption of separation is the assumption that seals you at the surface. Not because the separation is real, but because the assumption of it shapes how your awareness engages with the field of possibility. This is what the Dzogchen masters were pointing to. This is what the Upanishadic sages were pointing to. This is what the von Neumann-Wigner interpretation of quantum mechanics approaches from the other direction. The observer is not separate from the observed. The experiencer is not separate from the field. And the moment awareness recognizes this, not as a concept, but as a direct recognition of what is actually the case, the relationship between thought and reality changes entirely. Because now thought is not something a small, separate thing is using to try to influence an outside world. Thought is the field knowing itself in a particular configuration. And the field knowing itself in a particular configuration is not separate from the field reorganizing around that configuration. This is not magic. This is not wishful thinking. This is the structural consequence of taking seriously what quantum mechanics found and what the deepest contemplative traditions mapped. But let's be precise about what this means practically. Because this is where most popular treatments of this material go wrong, and going wrong here is going wrong at the most important layer. The popular version says, think about what you want, and the universe will give it to you. Focus on abundance, and abundance will come. Visualize your goal, and reality will rearrange itself to match your visualization. This is the surface version of a real phenomenon, and the surface version is not just incomplete. It is counterproductive, because it reinforces the very assumption it claims to dissolve. If you are using your thoughts to try to get something from the universe, you are still operating from the assumption of separation. You are still a small separate thing trying to influence an outside world. Just now, you are using quantum language to describe the attempt. The assumption underneath the practice is the same assumption that prevents the practice from working. The layer beneath the popular version is this: reality is not obeying your thoughts. Reality is obeying your state of being. And your state of being is determined not by what you think, but by what you are identified as. There is a specific distinction here that is worth developing carefully, because it is where everything turns. Identification is not the same as belief. You can believe that you are connected to the quantum field without being identified as that connection. Belief is a thought you hold. Identification is what you are not questioning about the nature of the thing that is holding the thought. You can believe all the right things and still be identified as a small separate thing that is trying to use the right beliefs to get something from the outside world. And from that identification, the beliefs do not reach the field, they stay at the surface. What reaches the field is a shift in identification, a genuine, not conceptual recognition of what the experiencer actually is. Not a thought about being connected to the field. The direct recognition that the field is what you are, that the awareness you are looking out from is not inside the field looking out at it. It is the field looking at itself from a particular point of crystallization. When that recognition is genuine, not believed but recognized, something changes in how thought operates. Not because you are now using thought differently, because thought is now arising from a different identification. And thought arising from the identification of being the field is not a small thing trying to influence a big thing from the outside. It is the field knowing itself in a configuration. And the field knowing itself in a configuration is not separate from the field being that configuration. This is why the ancient teachers did not teach manifestation techniques. They taught recognition. They pointed to what was already the case beneath the layer of assumption. Because once the recognition is genuine, the techniques are unnecessary. And before the recognition is genuine, the techniques are just more activity at the surface. Let me give you a practice, not a technique for getting something, a practice for reaching the layer where the real shift happens. Find something in your environment right now that you are looking at. It does not matter what it is. A wall, a window, a surface. Look at it the way you normally look at things, which is to say, look at it as an object separate from you, out there, existing independently of your observation of it. Now hold that, and notice something. Notice that you are not just seeing the object, you are aware of seeing the object. There is the object, and there is the seeing, and there is the awareness of the seeing. That awareness, the bare fact of knowing that seeing is happening, is not inside the object. It is not inside your eyes. It is not locatable anywhere in the physical scene you are observing. It is the context within which the entire scene appears. Now ask yourself, where does that awareness end and the object begin? Not philosophically, experientially. Look for the boundary. Look for the edge where the awareness stops and the object starts. You will find the object has edges. You will find the awareness has none. The awareness is not a thing among the things you are observing. It is what the observing is happening within. And now, from that recognition, not from thinking about it, but from actually noticing it, let a thought arise. Any thought. And notice, the thought is appearing within the same awareness that the object is appearing within. The thought is not more inside you than the object is outside you. Both are appearances within the same field of awareness. Stay here for a moment. Do not move toward the next idea. Just notice that both the object in front of you and the thought arising about it are appearing in the same space. The same unbounded, edgeless, unlocatable knowing. The thought about the object and the object itself are not in two different places, one inside and one outside, separated by the boundary of a skull. They are both appearances within the same awareness. The skull, too, is an appearance within that awareness. The body that contains the skull is an appearance within that awareness. The room that contains the body is an appearance within that awareness. And the awareness itself is not contained by any of it. This is not a visualization. This is not a conceptual exercise. This is a direct noticing of what is actually the case right now, in this moment, in the experience you are already having. The awareness you are looking out from has no walls. It has no inside. It is not located in the body the way water is located in a glass. The body is located in it the way a cloud is located in the sky. The cloud is in the sky. But the sky is not in the cloud. This is the recognition the Dzogchen tradition calls self-liberation. Not the elimination of thought, not the control of thought. The recognition that thought and world are both appearances within the same awareness, and that awareness is not a small thing inside a big world. It is the ground within which both arise. When you operate from that recognition, even briefly, even imperfectly, the relationship between your thoughts and your reality is not the relationship of a cause trying to produce an effect across a gap. The gap is not there. The cause and the effect are in the same field. The thought and the world it is about are both crystallizations of the same awareness, and awareness, when it knows what it is, does not produce thoughts about what it wants. It produces configurations of itself, and configurations of the field are not separate from the field being in that configuration. This is what the thumbnail means when it says reality is obeying you. Not you, the small separate person. You, the awareness that the field is. When that awareness knows what it is, reality is not obeying something outside it. Reality is the obedience. Reality is the field knowing itself. And the you that is the field knowing itself is not waiting for reality to comply. It is reality. And I want to ask you something here. At this layer of the transmission, what is something you always sensed was true, beneath the surface of your life? Something you could feel, but could not yet name, that this material is finally giving language to. Leave it in the comments. The collective depth we build together in that space is itself a kind of field coherence. But let's not stop there, because there is a layer beneath even this that most treatments of this subject never reach, and it is the layer that explains something that the recognition alone does not explain. If awareness is the field, and the field is what produces reality, why does reality seem so resistant? Why does the world seem to push back? Why do intentions not always, or even usually, produce the outcomes that the field is consciousness framework seems to predict? This is the question that honest engagement with this material has to answer. And the surface answer, the one that protects the framework from scrutiny, is you are not doing it right. You are still identified with the small self. Your beliefs are blocking the flow. You have resistance you have not cleared. This answer is not entirely wrong, but it is being used as a way to avoid a harder question. The harder question is this: What if reality's apparent resistance is not a failure of the framework, but a feature of it? Here is the layer beneath the resistance. The quantum field does not resolve into a single actuality because one observer wants it to. The quantum field is being observed by an incomprehensible number of observers simultaneously. Every conscious system, every awareness, every point of crystallization in the field is participating in the ongoing resolution of what reality is. And reality as you experience it is not the output of your individual observation alone. It is the output of the totality of observations, the intersection of an unimaginable number of wave function collapses, each one contributing to the shared configuration of the field. This is what physicists call decoherence. When a quantum system interacts with a large number of other systems, the superposition becomes so entangled with the environment that the quantum behavior becomes undetectable at the macroscopic scale. The quantum possibilities are still there, but they are now correlated with the states of so many other systems that the interference effects that make quantum behavior visible at the small scale wash out at the large scale. What this means for the relationship between consciousness and reality is not that the individual observer has no effect. It means that the individual observer's effect is real, but is always operating within a field that is simultaneously being shaped by every other observer. Reality is not obeying just you. Reality is the ongoing resolution of the participation of every awareness that exists. And this is where the picture becomes more precise and more honest than most popular treatments allow it to be. Because decoherence does not eliminate quantum effects at the macroscopic scale, it distributes them. The individual observer's contribution to the field's resolution does not disappear into the noise of collective observation. It becomes part of the collective configuration. The way a single voice in a choir does not disappear into the sound, it contributes to the sound. The harmony is not separate from the individual voices. It is the individual voices in relationship. What this means is that the question is not whether your individual awareness participates in the crystallization of reality. It does. The question is what kind of contribution your participation makes to the collective configuration. And the answer to that question depends entirely on the layer from which your awareness is operating. An awareness operating from the identification of being a small, separate thing contributes a certain kind of crystallization to the field. A crystallization organized around the assumption of separation, around the experience of being bounded and threatened and in need of getting something from outside itself. And that crystallization, multiplied across billions of observers, all operating from the same surface identification, produces the texture of the shared reality that most people inhabit. A reality that confirms the assumption of separation. A reality in which the world appears to be a collection of separate things competing for limited resources. A reality that looks exactly like what you would expect a field to look like when every observer is contributing the assumption of separation to its ongoing resolution. But an awareness operating from the recognition of being the field contributes something different. A crystallization organized around coherence rather than separation. Around participation rather than competition. Around the recognition that the boundary between self and world is a layer, not a foundation. And that contribution, even from a single observer, is a real contribution to the field's configuration, not enough to override the collective momentum of billions of surface-identified observers. but enough to shift the local configuration of the field around that observer's experience. Enough to produce a life that does not feel like a small thing fighting a big world. Enough to begin changing the collective field in the only direction it can be changed, from the inside, one recognition at a time. This is the layer that the ancient wisdom traditions encoded in their concept of karma. Not karma as a moral accounting system, not the surface version where good actions produce good results and bad actions produce bad results, as a kind of cosmic reward and punishment mechanism. Karma as the accumulated momentum of all the observations, all the crystallizations, all the identifications that have contributed to the current configuration of the shared field. The Sanskrit word karma simply means action. But in the deeper teaching, action is not just physical action. Action is any event that leaves an impression, any crystallization of the field that shapes the probability distribution of future crystallizations. And the accumulated karma of all beings, all observers, all awarenesses contributing to the field simultaneously is what produces the texture of the shared reality that any individual observer encounters. This is why individual intention does not simply override the shared field. Not because the individual is powerless, but because the individual is one voice in a chorus that is singing the world into being. And the world that results is not any single voice's composition. It is the harmony, or the dissonance, of all of them together. But here is what this actually means for you, and this is the layer that changes everything. If reality is the ongoing resolution of the participation of all observers, then the question is not how to make the field obey you individually. The question is how to align your participation with the deepest current of the field, the current that moves beneath the surface noise of individual desires and fears and resistances, the current that is the field's own tendency toward coherence, toward complexity, toward what physicists who study self-organizing systems call emergent order. The field, left to its own dynamics, does not tend toward chaos. It tends toward structure, toward pattern, toward increasing complexity and coherence. This is what the second law of thermodynamics gets wrong when it is applied to living systems. Entropy increases in closed systems, but living systems are not closed. They are open systems that take in energy and use it to build increasing order. Life is the universe's way of creating local pockets of extraordinary coherence within a larger field that tends toward equilibrium. Consciousness, awareness, the thing you are, is the most coherent structure the universe has yet produced. And when that coherent structure knows what it is, when awareness recognizes itself as the field, rather than as a small thing inside the field, it does not try to override the field's tendency toward coherence. It participates in it. It becomes a point of crystallization that adds to the field's coherence rather than working against it. And this is where the chosen one's framing in the title of this transmission becomes precise. The chosen ones are not people who have been selected by an external force for special treatment. The chosen ones are the ones who have chosen, who have made the choice, not once but continuously, to operate from the deeper identification rather than the surface one, who have chosen to recognize what they are rather than to accept the surface explanation of what they are, who have chosen to participate in the field's tendency toward coherence, rather than to fight the field from the position of a small, separate thing trying to get what it wants. The choosing is the thing, and it is a choosing that happens at a level beneath deliberate thought. It is the choosing of what you are identified as, the choosing of which layer you are operating from, and that choosing is available to you right now, in this moment, not as a technique and not as an achievement, as a recognition. Let me show you one more layer, because there is something about the mechanism of how thought actually rewrites reality, not metaphorically but mechanically, that most people who teach this material never explain. And it is the most important layer of all. Your brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons. Each neuron connects to thousands of others. The total number of synaptic connections in a single human brain is estimated at around 100 trillion. 100 trillion connections, each one capable of strengthening or weakening based on how often it is activated. This is what neurologists call synaptic plasticity. The brain is not a fixed structure. It is a constantly reorganizing network, and it reorganizes itself in response to the pattern of its own activity. The famous shorthand for this is Hebb's rule, named after the neuropsychologist Donald Hebb, who formalized it in 1949. Neurons that fire together wire together. Connections that are repeatedly activated become stronger. Connections that are rarely activated weaken and eventually disappear. The brain is literally being physically rewritten by the pattern of its own firing. And what determines the pattern of firing? Thought, experience, attention. The things you repeatedly think, the things you repeatedly attend to, the things you repeatedly experience. These are the things that become structurally encoded in the physical architecture of your brain. This is not a small claim. It means that the life you have lived has left a physical record in your neural architecture. Every repeated thought has strengthened certain pathways. Every repeated pattern of attention has built certain structures. Every repeated emotional response has carved certain channels. Your brain right now is a physical map of your history of awareness. The places you have repeatedly looked, the conclusions you have repeatedly drawn, the identifications you have repeatedly inhabited. All of it is encoded in the connectivity of 100 trillion synaptic connections. And this is why surface level change is so difficult. When you try to think differently without shifting the deeper identification, you are trying to create new ripples on the surface of a body of water whose entire depth has been shaped by decades of the old pattern. The new ripple forms, and then the depth reasserts itself. The old current pulls the surface back to its established pattern, not because you are weak, because the depth is real, and the depth is physical, and changing the depth requires more than a new thought. It requires a sustained shift in the layer from which thought arises. Now hold that next to the quantum layer. Your brain is a physical system. Its neurons are physical structures made of atoms, Those atoms are quantum systems. Their behavior is governed by quantum mechanics. The electrochemical signals that pass between neurons, the ion channels that open and close, the neurotransmitters that cross synaptic gaps. All of this is happening at a scale where quantum effects are not negligible. There is active research, controversial but serious, into whether quantum coherence plays a functional role in neural processing. The physicist Roger Penrose and the anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff proposed in the 1990s that quantum computations occurring in structures called microtubules within neurons might be the physical basis of consciousness. This remains contested. But the question of whether the brain's function involves quantum processes is not a fringe question. It is an active area of serious scientific investigation. What is not contested is this: your thoughts change your brain physically. Your brain is a quantum system. Quantum systems are embedded in the quantum field. The quantum field is the ground of physical reality. The chain is not metaphorical, it is mechanical. Thought reshapes the brain. The brain is a quantum system. The quantum system participates in the field. The field is what physical reality is made of. Your thoughts are not separate from reality. They are a mechanism by which reality rewrites itself at the level of the one physical system most directly in contact with awareness. And the direction of that rewriting is determined by the layer from which the thoughts arise. Thoughts arising from the identification of being a small separate thing create a brain that is optimized for navigating a world in which you are a small separate thing. A brain that is exquisitely sensitive to threat, to scarcity, to the boundaries between self and other. A brain that sees the field as something outside it, something to be managed and influenced and hoped from. Thoughts arising from the recognition of being, the field create a brain that is optimized for something different. Not for managing the world from the outside, but for participating in it from the inside. A brain that is sensitive to coherence, to pattern, to the deep current of the field's tendency toward order. A brain that does not experience reality as something to be overcome, but as something to be aligned with, because the alignment is not between you and something outside you. It is the field aligning with itself. This is what the contemplative traditions mean when they talk about enlightenment as a change in perception rather than a change in circumstances. The circumstances of an enlightened person are not necessarily better in the surface sense. They are not richer or more comfortable or more successful by conventional measures. What changes is the layer from which they perceive. And from that layer, the same circumstances that would produce suffering in the surface identification produce something else. Not happiness in the ordinary sense. Something more like the recognition that the field is always already perfect in its own configuration, that what appears as resistance from the surface layer is, from the deeper layer, the field's own coherence asserting itself. Let me tell you about a woman named Mara. Mara was a scientist. She studied the behavior of water, not the chemistry of water, not the physics of water molecules, but the patterns that water makes when it moves. Eddies and currents and vortices, and the way a river finds its way around an obstacle. She spent years watching water, mapping it, describing its behavior with equations. One day she was watching a river and she saw a large stone in the middle of the current. The water was hitting the stone and dividing around it, creating turbulence downstream, eddies on either side, a zone of disturbed flow that extended for a long distance below the stone. And she was watching the stone and thinking about the stone as an obstacle, a disruption, something the river had to work around. And then something shifted in how she was seeing it. She stopped seeing the stone as an obstacle to the river and started seeing the stone as part of the river, not an interruption of the pattern but a feature of it. The eddies were not disruptions. They were the river being the river around a stone. The turbulence was not a failure of the river to flow smoothly. It was the river's response to the stone, which was itself part of the river's environment, which was itself part of the larger system that included the river and the stone and the bank and the watershed and the rain that fed it all. The river was not being obstructed. The river was doing exactly what a river does, which is to find its way through the landscape it is in. And the landscape it is in is not separate from the river. The landscape and the river are one system, and the pattern of the river is the pattern of that system knowing itself. And Mara realized she had been doing the same thing in her own life. She had been treating the obstacles in her path as disruptions to the pattern of her life, as stones in her river, as things to be worked around or removed. And from that perspective, her life was full of resistance, full of things that were not cooperating with what she wanted. But what if the obstacles were not separate from the pattern? What if the resistance was the field showing her the shape of the larger system she was embedded in? What if the turbulence was not a failure of her life to flow smoothly, but the life doing exactly what it does when it encounters the landscape it is in? She did not stop working on her problems. She did not accept everything passively, but she stopped experiencing the resistance as evidence that the field was against her. She started experiencing it as information from the field about the shape of the larger pattern. And from that shift in identification, from obstacle navigator to pattern reader, her relationship to her circumstances changed completely. Not the circumstances, the relationship. And the relationship is what determines what you crystallize from the field. Because the field is not responding to what you want. The field is responding to what you are. And what you are is determined by the layer from which you are perceiving. And the layer from which you are perceiving is determined by the identification you are operating from. This is the full chain, and every link in it is real. Identification determines perception. Perception determines the layer of the field you are in contact with. The layer of the field you are in contact with determines which possibilities are available to crystallize. The possibilities that crystallize become the thoughts that arise. The thoughts that arise shape the brain. The brain is a quantum system embedded in the field. The field is what reality is made of. You are not outside reality trying to influence it. You are reality influencing itself through the specific crystallization of awareness that you are. and the direction of that influence is determined by the deepest layer of what you take yourself to be. This is what it means to be a chosen one. Not to be chosen by something outside you, to choose the recognition of what you actually are, beneath the layer of the surface story, beneath the layer of the biographical self, beneath the layer of the separate thing, looking out at the world. To choose the recognition that the awareness you are looking out from is not inside the world. The world is inside it. Let me give you one final layer. Because everything we have covered, the quantum mechanics, the ancient wisdom, the neurological mechanism, the identification shift, all of it has been pointing towards something that can only be pointed toward. It cannot be explained. It can only be recognized. There is a moment in the practice of looking at the awareness itself when the looking turns around. When the awareness that has been looking at objects, including the object of its own thoughts and the object of its own identification, suddenly becomes aware of itself. Not as a thought about itself, not as a concept of itself, as itself, directly, without the mediation of a concept. This moment is what the Zen tradition calls Kensho, what the Tibetan tradition calls Rigpa recognition, what Ramana Maharshi pointed to when he said the question, "Who am I?" is not a question to be answered, but a question to be dissolved, not answered, because any answer is another thought, another object of awareness, another layer on top of the awareness itself, dissolved, because when you look for the one who is asking the question, you find awareness looking at itself, and in that looking there is no separate looker. There is only the looking, and in that looking, the separation between observer and observed, between thought and world, between the one who wants and the thing that is wanted, that separation is not resolved. It is revealed to have never been there, not as a philosophical conclusion, as a direct recognition. From that recognition, the question of whether your thoughts are rewriting reality becomes a different question. Not because it stops being true that they are, but because the frame of you rewriting reality assumes a you that is separate from the reality being rewritten. And the recognition reveals that the separation was always a layer on top of something that had no separation in it. The rewriting is not something you do to reality. The rewriting is reality doing what it always does, which is to know itself in ever new configurations. And you, the awareness that is reading these words right now, are one of those configurations. A specific, unrepeatable, irreplaceable crystallization of the field knowing itself. And the thoughts you are having right now are not your thoughts in the sense of belonging to a separate self. They are the field's thoughts, reality thinking itself through the specific aperture of your awareness. And that recognition, when it is genuine, changes everything. Not because it gives you power over reality, but because it reveals that the power was never the point. The point was always the recognition. The point was always the awareness knowing what it is. And reality, the whole of it, every quantum field and every wave function and every collapsing superposition and every cobblestone street laid over older cobblestone streets, reality has been waiting for this recognition. the way a mirror waits for someone to stand in front of it. Not to be seen, to see. You are the field seeing itself. Your thoughts are the field knowing itself in the specific configuration of your awareness. And the reality that appears around you is not separate from that knowing. It is that knowing, crystallized, made visible, given the appearance of solidity and permanence, so that the knowing can encounter itself as something to be explored. This is the deepest layer, and it has been here the whole time, beneath every other layer, waiting not to be discovered, but to be recognized. Because you cannot discover what you already are, you can only stop assuming you are something else. The veil between you and this recognition is not thick, it is thin. It is thinner than you have been assuming. It is the thickness of one unexamined belief, the belief that the awareness you are is inside the world rather than the world being inside it. And that belief, once seen, cannot be unseen. Not because you have learned something new, because you have recognized something that was always the case, beneath every layer you had been looking at instead. Something in you recognized this before you had words for it. Something in you has always known that the surface story was incomplete, that the small, separate self was a layer, not a foundation, that beneath the layer of what you have been told you are, there is something that does not have an edge, that does not have a boundary, that is not located in one place, looking out at everywhere else. That something is what has been reading these words. That something is what has been here through every layer of this transmission. That something is what the quantum field is when it knows itself. That something is what the ancient teachers were pointing to when they refused to name it, because any name is a layer on top of it, and it is beneath all layers. You are not a chosen one because something chose you. You are a chosen one because you are choosing, right now, in this moment, to see beneath the surface, to recognize what is beneath the layer of what you have been calling yourself, to allow the recognition that has been waiting beneath every assumption you have ever held to finally surface. And reality, which is not separate from you, which is the field knowing itself through you, reality will reflect that recognition back, not as a reward, as a consequence. The way a mirror reflects, not because it is rewarding you with your reflection, but because that is what mirrors do. That is what reality does. It reflects the layer from which you are perceiving. Perceive from the surface, and reality reflects a surface. Perceive from the depth, and reality reflects the depth. Not because reality is changing, because the depth was always there, and you are now seeing it. This is the layer beneath everything. This is what has been hidden in plain sight, beneath every ordinary moment of your ordinary life. This is what the quantum physicists found when they followed the mathematics of wave function collapse to its logical conclusion, and discovered that consciousness is not a product of matter, but the ground from which matter's definite properties arise. This is what the Dzogchen masters pointed to when they said the nature of mind is the nature of reality. This is what Elias found when he went down the stairs beneath the basement and found a whole city that had been there all along. Beneath the city he thought he knew. It was always there. You just hadn't looked deep enough yet. And now you have. What you have touched in this transmission cannot be unfelt. The recognition, even if it is incomplete, even if it is glimpsed rather than fully inhabited, leaves a trace of knowing that the surface is not the whole story, that beneath the layer of the separate self, beneath the layer of the thought that tries to influence the outside world, beneath the layer of the belief that you are a small thing in a big world, there is something that is not small and is not inside the world and does not need the world to comply with it because it is not separate from the world. That trace is the beginning, not the end. The beginning of a different relationship with every thought you think, every moment you experience, every layer of reality you encounter. Not the relationship of a navigator to a landscape, the relationship of the field to itself, of awareness to its own appearance, of the ocean to its own waves. If this transmission has opened a layer in you, consider returning to it in a moment of stillness, early morning before the surface noise builds, or in the quiet just before sleep when the deeper layers are most accessible. Or share it with someone who has been sensing that something lies beneath the surface of their reality but has not yet found the language for it. That act of sharing is itself a field event. It gives someone access to a layer they could feel but could not reach alone, and in doing so, it creates a shared depth between two awarenesses that neither could generate in isolation. Go back into your life from this layer, not the surface layer, the layer beneath it, the layer where your thoughts are not attempts to influence an outside world, but the field knowing itself in the specific configuration of your awareness, the layer where reality is not something that happens to you, but something that happens as you, through you, because of what you are. This is what was hidden beneath the surface of the question your life has been asking. Not how do I get what I want from reality, but what am I, that reality and I are not two things. The answer has always been here, beneath everything, waiting for the awareness that is you to look deep enough to find it. You have looked, and what has been found cannot be unfound. Now, take this with you, not as a concept to carry around, as a recognition to return to. Whenever the surface identification reasserts itself, whenever the small, separate self reclaims its apparent solidity, whenever the world appears to be resisting you from the outside, remember that there is a layer beneath that appearance. Remember that the resistance is the field showing you the shape of the larger pattern. Remember that you are not a thing inside the field trying to change it. You are the field, temporarily crystallized into the specific aperture of this awareness, looking at itself, and from that remembering, even briefly, even imperfectly, the relationship between your thoughts and your reality will not be what it was before this transmission. It cannot be, because the layer has been lifted, and a lifted layer does not fall back into place the same way. Welcome to the depth. You were always here, you just know it now.